Hi, I'm Brian Smith, and I'm here to discuss my action research project conducted through CSUN Secondary Education Masters of the Arts program. The title of my paper, Breaking the Timer, the Effective Test Prep in a Title I Chemistry Classroom. That's a bit of a mouthful, so I want to break that down bit by bit. First off, who the heck am I? My name is Brian Smith. If you haven't had the misfortune of sharing a speaking space with me for the last 2 years, here are some of my credentials. Uh, I got my bachelor's in science and biochemistry at UCLA in 2012. Um, Very much about the hard sciences. Um, I got my secondary credential here at Northridge in 2018, and I am now just wrapping up my first master's. I am a third year chemistry teacher at LA Unified, so I'm still pretty new to it. Um, and I work at a local Northeast school site. I definitely like science, I like numbers, and I like tests if they're fair. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight about the intentions behind this study, who I am and what this is about. I also, if we're talking about credentials, I got to speak to the credentials of this program. I feel like it's important to recognize the who's who of this whole project. Um, it would not be what it is without these guys. So this is Dr. Mike Rivas, Dr. Norm Hare, and Dr. Brian Foley. These guys were fantastic support and guidance during this study. Um, they are responsible for a huge amount of curriculum and educator development in Southern California, and hopefully their involvement in this research gives it a little bit more credibility. If you are a student in a future cohort, this video might be directed towards you. Or you are interested in getting involved in the Masters of Art program at Northridge, I have nothing but good things to say about the program and these guys. Um, my cohort has also been super supportive. We are the cohort 8. I dare say I might say that they are GUR 8. Um, I'm sure your future cohort would be just as supportive and help you get through your research. For anybody who personally knows Dr. Rivas, you'd probably crack up looking at this picture because it kind of paints him as a mean guy, which is the complete opposite. Okay, so we've talked about my name, talked about my institution, but what the heck is the deal with this title? What the heck is Title One even? And test prep, wait, we're supposed to be teaching students to be critical thinkers with NGSS. Why are we making them learn how to take tests? Well, let's talk about tests. I want to talk mostly about standardized testing. Um, since this action research is occurring in my classroom, which is an LA Unified school, um, you got to understand that there are some standardized tests that are associated with NGSS. Um, and that big test is coming from the California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, and that would be the California Science Test or the CAS test. And that's being applied statewide to identify schools that might need help or intervention. Um, in fact, the first administrations of the test they told teachers that the data would not become publicly available, but uh, that's not the case anymore. In fact, um, you can pull up all of your data for the CAST for schools, for districts, for the entirety of the state. Anybody can pull this up. Um, in fact, I know that admins are comparing schools because my admin was the first one who alerted me to the release of these scores, and he emailed the department. So, um, you know, even though we're not supposed to be comparing, people are comparing. Admins are comparing, teachers are comparing, parents are comparing. They're going to look at schools and they're going to look at the metrics and they're going to make decisions. If you're familiar with the California dashboard gives parents information about schools that include suspension rates and high school graduation rates. The CAS will be going on there pretty soon. So if parents are deciding to flee your school because of low test scores, that could jeopardize your position. You might not have your line on your matrix. You could really actually be impacted by these tests. So it's important to recognize the importance of these tests, specifically the CAST. Here is a CAST type question. And it kind of poses a question. If teachers are going to be held liable to these test scores, what kind of agency do they have in preparing students to do better on these tests? So it is still a standardized test. You can see this is one of the practice problems that's offered, and it's relating to chemistry. What if you're a physics teacher? I mean, it's still covered within physical chemistry. Are you expected to teach all of the content of chemistry? No, no, it's supposed to be content independent, which means that instructors don't have to hit all of the content as long as they help students identify certain patterns. In fact, you can see this is cross-cutting concept is listed as a pattern. Now that's the pattern we see in the electrons and ionization, but you could also use that to say, hey, wait, are there patterns in the answers to these tests? And there are certain techniques, like if I looked at this problem, I'd look at the ions, I see, oh, all the Br are all -1, and I see some charges on the 2s. Oh, okay, well, there probably is a pattern of the numbers canceling each other out, and you can kind of evaluate and get to a logical conclusion. You rule out certain things. So are there ways to train for these tests? Maybe. And really, the CAS isn't the only standardized test that our students are going to encounter. So it's not just preparing them for the CAS, it's preparing them for a whole host of different standardized tests. College Board affects, I mean, the CAS test is taken through the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, the SBAC, is another test for math and science, math and English. College Board is constantly putting out tests for AP credit, and you have the big college entrance exams, the ACT and the SAT. And these will affect the trajectory of my students. So if I can identify a way to make their test scores higher, I feel like it's sort of my prerogative to get those scores higher to help them. I do want to note that, strangely enough, because of COVID, there are actually no requirements for the SAT or ACT this year for 2021 applicants to the UC system. But I have to warn, because I had a student who she told me earlier this year that when we were discussing the PSAT, she said she wasn't stressed about it and she didn't even need to try, because another teacher told her that the SAT was not being accounted for in admissions decisions anymore. This teacher read an article early in February about it, and it was sort of misleading, because that's not actually the case. The suspension of standardized testing requirements for applicants was intended as accommodation, not a permanent policy shift, and does not foreclose future board policy actions. And that's the UC president is saying, yeah, we're getting rid of the test this year, but we don't have plans to remove it completely. And they actually had this discussion in prior to COVID that no, they're keeping it. Their metrics and their algorithms already account for different inequalities, so it's not going away. And if we are comparing applicants from two similar schools, like say my school with another school in the surrounding area, if the socioeconomic status and all other things considered are pretty equal, then the college is going to look at standardized test scores. So don't think that they're going away. And hey, once the students are in college, that's just the first step. I mean, we're trying to develop critical thinking scientists. Well, let's say we do create critical thinking scientists and they've graduated from college and they're ready to go on to the next step. Well, if the next step is gatekeep by a standardized test, those critical thinking skills won't help if they can't get past the test. So you have lots of students that study vigorously for the MCAT to get into medical school. You'll have students, and these are all science students that might want to pursue something in business or numbers, might do the GMAT, or they might go to graduate school and take the GRE. If you want to go to a number of other professional schools that deal with medical sciences, you might have to take the PCAT or the DAT or the OAT. And heck, even as educators, we had to take the CSET. Imagine if you had never developed the ability to take standardized tests efficiently and you weren't able to pass the CSET, then you would not be in the position you were at as a credentialed educator. So, it seems pragmatic to prepare our students for these standardized tests. In fact, so the particular thing that I'm looking at, the particular test strategy, was kind of influenced from my own experience. I, in undergrad, was planning on becoming a physician, and I enrolled to take the MCAT. I enrolled in an MCAT prep course. The MCAT is a pretty comprehensive science test. It's not content independent. I would say it's just content comprehensive. You got to know a little bit about everything in terms of the physical and biological sciences. And the content of the refresher course, or the test prep course, was mostly content refreshments, but there's also a lot of test taking strategies. So some of these techniques, things like quickly eliminating improbable answers, watching the timer, also skipping time demanding questions if the timer is getting close. These are probably things that are taught in every test prep class. But there is a problem with these test prep courses. And that price. Look at it. I mean, I honestly, I paid about $1,200 for my course. And that was years and years ago. I'm sure they are up to $2,500 because you have a lot of people that are competitive applicants. They're willing to spend that. Unfortunately, in the context of my classroom, my students don't really have that luxury. And that kind of is why I've included the context of the Title I school in the study, in that, these students don't really have the same opportunities. For people who aren't aware, Title I means that it's predominantly low-income students, and it's been federally recognized as Title I. And I love my students, and I know that they have an amazing potential, but I also have to be pragmatic about their resource limitations. If they can't take a private prep course to refine their test taking skills, then maybe that's on me. And I'm wondering, how can I implement this into my course effectively so that I can get students to see gains? So as a scientist, I want to isolate variables. So I've isolated the test taking strategy down to one variable. And in this case, it's timers. That was a big thing for a lot of test prep. Is the strategy involves getting the timer down, making sure that you practice with the test with the same timer. I worked for a college advisory company, and we did mock SAT sessions pretty much every weekend, and parents would pay to drop their student off to take the test. Even though it was a publicly available practice SAT, they would pay because they wanted the environment, the timed environment for their students to practice in. And I always wondered, well, is that actually helping? So I kind of wanted to embed that in my course. And I posed the question, if timers are embedded into course material delivered in a standardized test assessment format, like multiple choice, will there be any impact on the student population? Will student achievement go up? Will student engagement go up? Maybe a little bit of both, maybe none. So that was a lot about intro. Let me just skip then into my research questions and talk about the implications. First off, what impact do timers have on student achievement in the classroom? What impact do timers have on student engagement in the classroom? What impact do timers have on student achievement on high-stakes standardized tests? And what impact do timers have on student engagement on high-stakes standardized tests? So I'm looking at achievement and engagement. How do I, and that's really the summation of my research. Let's go to the literature review. If you are in the cohort, you've got to do a grip of literature review. I did some research on the standardized testing environment, especially that on a larger scale, like that of the SAT or various other standardized testing projects. So this is some of the papers that are used as references. Also, I wanted to make sure that these assessments were being used in a constructive way in my class. Formative assessment helps drive instruction, so getting feedback and seeing where my students were at allows me to, tailor the material towards them. So formative assessments was another point of research, and a lot of research on the impact of timers on standardized testing. This is talking about some of the positive impacts of time mindfulness and timer management and how those typically resulted in better exam scores. And some of the potential issues with test timers. One of the gold standard, so this is a quote, as an educational accommodation, extended time as standardized tests has long been regarded as the gold standard in many elementary, middle, high school, and even college settings. However, research suggests that extended time may have little effect on students' overall performance on standardized tests. So we give them extra time, but it doesn't really do much. Well, we'll see. And also just more literature that explains or reinforces the notion that maybe timers could have an impact. Additionally, I wanted to be impartial. There's a little bit of research that has some dissent on teaching to the test, more about teaching content. Okay, so how did I go about doing this? What was the methodology? Well, I first wanted to emulate the CAST in my classroom. But unfortunately, the CAST is sort of an adaptive test, which means that depending on how well you do on one question, you'll either get one set of questions or you won't get any more questions at all. So that's really hard to emulate in my classroom. I can't just take a sample practice test and put it in to my LMS and then have my students take it because I don't have their tools. So instead, what I've used as a substitute, which is content independent, the ACT Science. It's similar. It's 35 minutes, so I could fit that into my class period. It's not supposed to be about rote memorization because you can't know everything about every science. It's more about identifying patterns in data that they supply you, reading graphs, things like that. Things that allegedly the CAS should also be assessing. How did I do this? Well, so I set up the study so that my students took an ACT in fall of 2018, and they took the ACT Science Practice Test the 2019 edition. Then they took a month gap and did 5 timed assessments, or 5 timed assignments in the course. And these were standardized assignments that covered the material we were covering in chemistry. They range from temperature conversions, enthalpy calculations, gas laws, those sort of numerical based multiple choice selection problems. Then they did another science test, and they took another gap, and they did 5 more assignments and took a final test. These were all tracked through Schoology. So we've got metrics for time. That's my measure of engagement, and achievement, which is score. I also wanted to include a post-study survey to determine if there were any other patterns in the data set, figure out what's going on. Maybe explore the results a little bit further. So where, when, and Well, I had 138 of my honors chemistry students. It's LA Unified School, and it took about 8 weeks to do this in fall of 2019. And so let's jump to the results because we're running out of time a little bit. And the results are short and sweet, but also beg some questions. So first I did the baseline. And you can see the baselines, I compared it to the national average. The national average is seen at the bottom here. My students were scoring pretty well. They weren't doing too bad. Compared to the national average, they're maybe about 1 standard deviation below. So that's optimistic. It means that they could grow. I was happy to see that. Then they were given the assignments. So this is what I want to know is, would these timed assignments impact engagement or achievement on the assignments themselves? Would the timer affect those things? So I looked at the time spent on each assignment. Here's one of the control group assignments, and here's one of the test group assignments. Now, one thing to note is that in order to mitigate some of the problems with, say, students with IEPs that were having difficulty with the timer, I wanted to include all outliers, all values. If some student was taking a while, that's fine. It should be in the data set. So I made the timers not restrictive. They were just there. So the timer for this particular assignment, I believe, was 30 minutes. And most students were completing it way faster than that. But I didn't want to get rid of the students that were taking a little bit slower. But after doing a t-test comparison between the control and test groups, I didn't see any difference. I didn't see any difference in either the time taken or the achievement score. The scores were basically the same. There was no statistically significant difference. So those first two research questions, and wash. There were null hypothesis. Could it have been that the timer was a little bit lax? Maybe. So maybe we might see something different in the actual test. So in the test, we get some very interesting results. In fact, the experimental group did worse. The timers meant that they did worse. If they were using timed assignments, they were doing worse. What? That makes sense. Well, let's crunch the numbers, and I did a ANOVA test, and yeah, significantly worse. Like it's there. The p-value is low. It's pretty sure that there's something up. What the heck could have been going on? Well, if I look at the engagement metric or the time, I think that kind of answers some of it. My students that were training for the timer, well, they trained pretty well. They were pretty conscious of the timer. In fact, they accelerated. They were completing their tests way faster, probably without regard to using up all of the time and spending as much time as on every question as they could. I wanted my students to accelerate on the on-ramp to go from 0 to 50 so that they were on pace. Instead, because I was on their case about time, they accelerated to 100 miles per hour. They were just hitting that gas. So that didn't lead to improved scores. That just tanked their scores. So the timer training kind of not as beneficial as I thought it would be. I thought maybe the survey might give me some clues, but students were self-reporting, yeah, they weren't having a problem with time. They were not having a problem with time. I thought maybe they were guessing more, but I wasn't seeing that. More t-testing confirmed there wasn't really a difference between the groups. But they were still seeing high anxiety levels, which was kind of not good. So the timer didn't help them not run out of time, and it didn't really help them with anxiety levels either. So the timer really wasn't helping at all. So conclusions. Well, wasn't working. So we gotta get rid of that timer. In the name of science, I don't take these results as something bad or useless. Yeah, I came to a null hypothesis on a lot of my questions, but that's how science works. We reject models that don't fit. We make a hypothesis and test it. Doesn't work? Okay, good. Perfect. Now we've found out one way that it doesn't work. So these timers weren't really working in my class, and they kind of were a headache for the IEP issue and everything else. So that's one of the changes I'll be making to my own class, is just getting rid of assignment timers. So no reason for them. On a policy level, I kind of want to be an advocate now. There might be some implications for the school or district. I was under this misled assumption that if you give students a battery of tests, they're going to get better at taking tests. But that really wasn't the case. It was demonstrated in the numbers that I gave them more tests and they just did worse. They were disengaged. They cared less about every subsequent test, it seemed like. And even though LAUSD has kind of relaxed their SAT testing because of COVID right now, I'm sure that when we're back in full swing, it'll be expected that all students will take the SAT again. And in that way, I think I want to advocate that the SAT shouldn't necessarily be mandated, because there's a lot of students that are just disengaged and it's not doing them any favors. It's not having a bad score there, doesn't help them. It doesn't help the school, it doesn't help anybody. So I think I would advocate that the SAT be an optional thing once more. And my final follow-up, I know this might seem hypocritical because I gave them all these tests, I gave them this battery of tests and they did worse. Why should I give them more testing? Well, I got to modify more variables. I tried to isolate one variable, but there's all these other variables that are getting in the way of data potentially. So maybe I might have to swap the tests. I mean, objectively, it could have been that the students did better on the 2019 tests because the 2016 test was just more difficult. So maybe next year I would swap that out and start the students with a 2016 test and with a 2019 test, see if the data still pans out the same way. Additionally, I'd like to extend it maybe beyond my classroom and to the rest of the department. So I'll be sharing all of my resources on Schoology with my colleagues, and if anybody else is interested, just give me a shout out, reach out to me, and I can give you those resources. I can give you the test. You can maybe subject your students to these practice tests and see how they do. Maybe they will improve, maybe they won't. Maybe your course helps them. Maybe in my situation, it'll actually make it worse. But anyways, if you want those resources, you can reach me at brianteaches.com. I'll be hosting my paper there as well as my data, and you can email me at bsmith57@gmail or my LA Unified email at brian.smith1@lausd.net. Thank you for enduring this presentation, and hopefully your own action research projects are just as fruitful as mine. Have a good one.